This is a nice 4th of July where the states celebrate the Declaration of Independence from England, and where maybe one day we'll celebrate our separation from the tyranny of the central government. But on a different thing, this video is actually about the radio alarm saw again. So here we go. I ran into a problem with the radio alarm saw. It's what Wally Kunkel in his book on the radio alarm saw, Mr. Sawdust in his book referred to in ripping, especially the in-rip, as that dangerous 2 inches, or most dangerous 2 inches. Let me explain what I'm talking about here, what Wally was talking about, and I'll zoom in on that a little bit. Okay. When you're ripping a narrow piece, and you got the saw blade over very close to the fence, you can't get your hold downs any closer to the blade than what the rip fence will allow. You can only go so close. Same on the other side. So this most dangerous 2 inches he's talking about is when you twist this guard around to set it on top of the piece of wood you're ripping. As you pass it through, once you get to right here, this last 2 inches, and if you're using a smaller blade, like an 8-inch blade, that becomes 4 inches. All right, that becomes 4 inches where the back end of that piece of wood that you're ripping is not being held down. And what happened was I was trying to rip a piece of 1.5 inches by, I think it was 1.5 inches by 1.25 inches. I wanted to rip that down the middle. And when it got to that point, that hold down up there on the other side of the blade was not sufficient to hold that board down, and it sucked it right up. I mean, it just lifted right up off the table and jammed the motor to a dead stop. Of course, it's handy to have the buttons close and know where they're at, but there's always that momentary panic because stuff with the radio alarm saw, especially the powerful ones, but it probably applies to all of them, but probably more so to the more powerful ones, it happens quicker than you can imagine. And when that happens, when something like that happens, it always makes you happy that you're using a pusher. Instead of trying to push that stuff through by your hand, because I don't know that it would suck your hand in there, but it sure scared the hell out of you. So I devised a way of preventing. Okay, let me just back up a little bit. If this blade were out here and you were ripping, well, you could move this. You could move you could move these hold downs. You can move your hold down clear over here, right next to the blade. You could move the other hold down the other side, on the outfeed side. You could move it closer to the blade, so you wouldn't have any problem. But when you're ripping a narrow rip like this, well, you can only get your hold down that close. And I don't care if you were using those fancy, expensive board buddies instead of these homemade ones. You still couldn't get them close enough to compensate for that, to allow for that dangerous 2 inches where the back of the board being ripped is not being supported. So I came up with a solution, and it worked very well. Well, if I can get this thing to move. Oh, I pushed this over so tight that I can't get it to move. Okay, yeah, I'm caught behind the knob. Okay, so here's my solution. I purchased an inexpensive trowel or putty knife at the hardware store. Let's zoom out a little bit. Oop. This cost $1.29. I purchased 2 1/4-inch knobs that have 1/2-inch threaded bolts on them. As it turns out, I'm not going to be removing this very often. I could have just used 1/4-inch by 1/2, 1/4 by 1/2 bolts and washers and held it on there. So this, I had to grind a little of this stuff off of each side in order to make a place smooth enough to attach it to the back of the saw. Now this is pretty stiff. I would really like one that's just a little stiffer, but this is fine. And then you just bolt this to the back of your saw. And now you can see what happens when you shove, when you start to rip a board, that is going to lift up, and this is going to support your, let me get over here instead. This little flapper hanging down here is going to support your board on both sides of the blade, all the way into the blade, and all the way through. So when you get to this point on your rip, it's still being supported, and it's still being supported, so by the time you get to here, you're off of the back of the blade. See, these teeth are coming up, all right, and so they want to lift this board up off the table because they're turning like this. Well, you need something here to keep that from coming up. And that's what I devised, and I believe it works very well. Let's just run one rip here and see how it works in active practice. Okay, so run this over to a narrow rip. That's pretty narrow. That's a little too narrow. I'm going to say I want to be about halfway in the middle of the board. We'll run this in as close as we can get it to the rip vents. That's down. That puts pretty good down pressure on it. Run this over, close as we can get it. Remember to angle it just a little bit, a few degrees, so that it's pulling the board into the rip vents all the time. Move this one in as close as you can get it. Remember to angle it just a little bit so that it is, I can run that a little closer, and then angle it just a little bit where it's catching, got an angle on it to the blade. Make sure this is pushed down tight to the board you're going to rip. This board is the exact same width as the one that gave me fixed. Get that a little push down. Now I need to clear out this table a little. Just space my outfeed table. Now, well, nothing to do now except give it a whirl. Let me turn on the back this time. Lock down. see, we passed through the danger point without issue, and the board came out very nice. Before, when it got to here, this would have just lifted up like this and just jammed itself in there and pinched and shut the motor off. Well, it wouldn't shut the motor off, eventually it would flip the circuit breaker. But that's my solution to Wally Kunkel's problem of that dangerous 2 inches when the board is not being pushed down by the back of the guard. And I think it's a winner. If you guys want to give it a try, let me know what you think. And thanks for watching. I hope this video was, if not informative, at least entertaining. Thank you.